Welcome, everyone, to our Packers News free agency live stream virtually alongside Pete Dougherty. I am Olivia Reiner. We're doing things a little bit differently today, as you can tell. However, the format remains the same. We are going to be having a nice, lengthy discussion about the Packers and free agency today. And of course, we will answer your questions. So all of you over on Facebook right now, leave us a comment, leave us a question, leave us all of the grief that's building up inside you, whatever you have right now. Let us know, and we will address it toward the end of our show. However, I would like to start with some of the departures that happened just hours ago, including right tackle Brian Bulaga. He signed reportedly with the Chargers on a 3-year, $30 million deal. Pete, he rejoins former Packers offensive line coach James Campen. At that price, how likely was it that the Packers were even in on Bulaga to begin with?
Oh, you definitely get the sense that they either decided in the offseason, early in the offseason or at the combine, that he's going to end up getting X amount at minimum on the open market. And because of the injury risk plus his age, they just didn't want to pay whatever they thought that would be. I know I saw a tweet from a national reporter last week saying that the conservative starting spot would probably be like $12 million for Bulaga. So this is short of that, and we can get into later, whether the Packers should have been in on it. I think they may, or we can do it right now. It's a gray area call. Anyone who would argue that they should have paid him $10 million for a couple of years, I get it, but it probably to do that kind of deal with him would have cost them. I want to see the details, but $15 million guaranteed. And if I'm them, I'm just a little too worried that the next injury is the last one, and you'll end up paying him $15 million and getting half a season or maybe only one season more out of him, and that's it. So I still think they made the right call, but it's an area where reasonable people can definitely disagree.
Yesterday, the Packers signed right tackle Rick Wagner, originally from the Lions. How likely is it that Wagner is the solution to the Packers' right tackle position?
Well, for 2020, it's a lot more likely than not. But you never know if a draft pick might come out and beat him out, or let's say 7 games in, if they draft somebody high and the player's pretty good, Wagner maybe gets hurt, misses a game or two, and this guy comes in and plays well. It's happened a lot in the past. He might never get his job back. Could be something like that. But if you're laying down bets, you're putting bets on Wagner being the starting right tackle next season, next season, I guess it is.
In addition to Bulaga, former Packers outside linebacker Kyler Fackrell is also headed off. He is going to the New York Giants on a 1-year, $4.6 million deal, with other outside linebackers like Rashawn Gary, Preston and Zadarius Smith on the Packers roster ahead of Fackrell this past season. Why was this decision for Fackrell good for both the Packers and for him?
Well, the Packers just, they're not going to pay their number 3 outside linebacker, who should be number 4 by next year because they used such a high pick on Gary. I mean, they've got to start playing this guy. There's just no way you can pay a 4th outside linebacker. What was it, $4 million he's getting, something like that?
4.6.
Yeah, 4.6. So, Fackrell got a good contract, and the Packers, they're going to play Rashawn Gary. They need him to contribute a lot more this season than he did last year.
A good contract and an opportunity to not have to compete to get on the field as much as he did this past season. Let's move on to a recap of yesterday's signings. I already mentioned Rick Wagner. The Packers signed him for 2 years, $11 million deal with a $4.8 million cap hit in 2020. They also signed former Browns inside linebacker Christian Kirksey, a 2-year, $16 million deal worth $4 million in 2020. Given that salary cap information, Pete, how much more room does general manager Brian Gutekunst have to make moves in free agency this year?
So not a lot. I mean, it looks like they're around 15, but then you've got to account for, but then you throw in the RFAs that they did in the last couple of days. There's a couple million. You got their rookie pool, which is going to be about 2.5. They want to carry over. They usually like to carry over about 7.5 or so into the following season. They may have to scale back on that number a little bit. It might have to be less because I would think there's still a guy or two that they want to sign in free agency. So they don't have a ton of money to work with. Now they can cut Lane Taylor, which they haven't done yet. Maybe they're trying to trade him. I don't know, or maybe they plan on carrying him. But that would pick up $4 million in cap room. I mean, they could use that. They need a run stopper. This guy shouldn't be expensive, but they need a run stopper on the defensive line. I could see him going after a tight end. I wonder if they'll go after Eric Ebron. You know, I was talking with somebody today who thought he might cost in the $6 million range. That would take a lot of the money that they have available, although they can structure a deal where he would count less than that on this year's cap. But there are, it's limited. If they decided they wanted to make a really big move, I think all the really big moves are done. But if they did, they'd have to do probably have to redo some contracts. You don't want to get in that cycle where you're pushing so much money into future years because you eventually do have to pay the piper there.
You mentioned bolstering positions along the defensive line and tight end. However, I want to focus on the positions that Brian Gutekunst has already addressed in free agency. Looking at tackles that are currently on the Packers roster, specifically players that could play right tackle, the Packers have Alex Light and John LeGlue, and now they have Rick Wagner. How likely is it that Brian Gutekunst adds a tackle, whether it's in free agency or the draft?
I would think it's almost a given that he'll draft one. Could be any round. So I'm not going to say, for sure in the first 2 rounds or whatever. Although it could be in the first couple of rounds. But I would think it's almost a given they'll draft one because, they're going to need to replace Wagner, if not next year, the year after. And, you never know. Even, Bakhtiari was a 4th-round pick, started as a rookie. Lang and Sitton became very good players, 4th-round picks. Corey Linsley was a 5, I believe. He's been a starter for a long time. So they've done well with the later picks at that position, at the offensive line. But it wouldn't be a surprise they took one in the first 2 rounds either, because they do, besides needing someone to be a starter at right tackle, if not this year, then next, they need a backup swing tackle too. They had Valdir to do that last year, but the second half of the season. Not sure how comfortable they'd feel, if they think Alex Light can do that. I'm thinking they draft one for sure, and would not be a surprise at all if it's in the first 2 or 3 rounds.
Speaking of Jared Valdir, I'm going to take a question a little early, and look at this. We can put them on the screen. How cool is this, everyone? So Kyle asks, are the Packers going to keep backup tackle Jared Valdir, who played in 2 games this past season, started for Brian Bulaga in the playoff game against the Seattle Seahawks? How likely is it that Gutekunst tries to bring back Jared Valdir?
It sure, outside looking in, it sure looks very unlikely with what they're paying Wagner, which is not cheap. It's not super expensive, but it's, was it a 4.7 cap number, something like that? That's, it's a decent amount. And Valdir, he filled in really well last year. It was a really good signing, midseason signing. But he's 32 or 33 and has had a history of hip problems, and that even caused him to retire temporarily last year in camp. And you talk to people who've worked in this league a long time, and they're skeptical whether he could fill in for a game or 2, but if he had to play 4 or 5 weeks in a row, they think he might have a real big problem with that. I just, between how they've eaten up so much of their cap money and his age, it just seems to me it seems highly unlikely that they'd bring him back. Now watch, they'll turn around and sign him tomorrow, but.
That's what always happens, right? Thank you, Kyle, for your question. I will come back to some more questions in a little bit. However, I want to talk about inside linebacker as well. So other inside linebackers now, in addition to Christian Kirksey on the roster, include Oren Burks, Ty Summers, even Curtis Bolton, who spent the entire season on injured reserve. How likely is it that Brian Gutekunst would try to find another inside linebacker in free agency, or more likely in the draft?
I'm thinking they're going to draft one high, really high. They haven't had a good really talented guy in there for a long time. So I'm thinking in the top 3 rounds, even with Kirksey, and this is a pretty decent class, especially after the way a lot of these guys performed at the combine. I think it was 10 of them ran under 4.6, which is really fast, and that's a lot for any given draft class. Not that that makes them good players, but you're looking for speed and explosiveness in there. So I'm thinking a really good chance they draft one in the first 3 rounds. I would think after just looking more closely at their cap, it could be tough to squeeze another one in and also sign a defensive lineman, also sign a cheaper receiver or the tight end like we were talking. I don't think there's money for all that unless they start doing moves to push money into future caps, which I don't think they're going to do. So a lot more likely the draft than free agency, I would think.
Let's discuss a couple of yesterday's departures. Inside linebacker is Blake Martinez is off to the New York Giants, reportedly on a 3-year, $30 million deal. The Packers will miss his tackling ability, no doubt. Over the last 3 seasons, he's registered at least 140 tackles in each of them. However, what are the Packers looking to upgrade by letting Martinez walk at that position?
He's durable and smart, ran the defense, dependable all that way, but lacked explosiveness. So I think with Kirksey, they're just looking for a guy who will probably be a little better in coverage, you would think, and also faster to the sidelines, and probably not as good at taking on blockers in the run game, but a guy who can fill some of the alleys faster or get to the outside faster on some of those outside zone runs or run sweeps all the way around the end. So I think they're thinking that Kirksey is at least as good as Martinez, but he's cheaper. And the risk they're taking on is that he's only, 9 games he's played in the last 2 seasons? So it's missing 23 because of injuries. So they're taking a much bigger injury risk there. But they're putting at least a more talented athlete in there. Not necessarily a better player, but at least a more talented athlete.
Yes, that's a hamstring and a pec injury for Kirksey over the last 2 seasons. Only 9 games played. Certainly some risk there. In addition to Martinez leaving the Packers, free agent Jimmy Graham, who was cut by the Packers after Brian Gutekunst released him, decided not to bring him back for a 3rd season. He is off to the rival Chicago Bears on a 2-year, $16 million deal at 33 years old, Pete. He only had 5 touchdowns in the last 2 seasons with the Packers. How likely is it that Graham is able to boost his production in this upcoming year with the Bears?
I got to say that contract blew me away. If the reports are right, $9 million guaranteed. It just makes me wonder what tape the Bears are watching. I just can't see it at all that he'd be worth it. I honestly thought that he's a guy who probably wouldn't play if he wasn't going to make at least, I don't know, let's just kind of randomly $3 million, $4 million, something like that. And my guess was nobody was going to offer him that, and that would be it, and he'd retire and go to his passions of flying and all the other things that he loves to do. And I just think the Bears are going to end up this is a once great player who, when he retires, he's going to have a shot at the Hall of Fame, but I just am not seeing it at all, and I think they're going to end up being disappointed. It's not like he's going to be any faster or quicker next year than he is this year, than he was this past season. So I think they're going to end up being disappointed and feeling like they made a mistake. And I'm surprised because they got a chance to see him a lot, both live and I'm sure watching Packers tape against other teams when they're preparing for other North Division teams. They would have seen the tape, and I'm just surprised that they made this big an investment in him.
Well, for $8 million a year, Jimmy Graham will avoid retirement for possibly 2 years. We'll see what ends up happening there. I want to move into the discussion about the exclusive rights free agents on the Packers. All of them were extended their tenders today, including tight end Robert Tonyan, wide receiver Jake Kumaro, cornerback Shandon Sullivan, defensive lineman Tyler Lancaster, and finally wide receiver Alan Lazard. Lazard, second in receiving yards behind Devontae Adams. He had a big breakout season last season, How surprised are you that the Packers decided not to agree to a longer deal with Lazard?
I was thinking about that. I guess I'm not sure they don't have to do it because they control him for, another year after this. They'll control him for his restricted free agent year also. So they have that control. So it's not like it's something they need to do. But if they do approach it now or maybe later this year, he hasn't been paid very much yet. If they just offer him a decent extension, maybe he would, for not that much money, maybe they get him on the cheap for a couple more years. They've done that in the past. I know names are coming to mind, but I know they've done that in the past with a couple of the exclusive rights guys they like. Because he looks like he's going to be on the field quite a bit, but maybe he wouldn't bite. Maybe he feels like he would bet on himself, feels like he's showing enough, and he'd take the lower pay now, knowing that when he hit free agency after 4 seasons, that he could, he thinks that he could break the bank. So maybe he would wait and not sign a deal anyway. But they still have that option to approach it for an extension, anytime in the next half year, even year.
Regardless of what ends up happening, at least Allen Lazard will be with the Packers for another year. All right, everybody, let's head on over to Facebook, and we'll use this very fun functionality that I have to bring some of your questions up onto the screen. So why don't we start with David, who has a lot of question marks at the end of his question. Will the Packers target a defensive tackle in free agency? It's a good question. It's a good question. Who's out there that the Packers might be interested in to put alongside Kenny Clark on that defensive line?
So earlier in the offseason, about 3 weeks ago, I sat down and went through all the lists, and I just started writing down, at different positions, possible guys. And for the kind of guy that David's talking about here, I think he's talking about just a run-stopping guy to play, first and second down, split snaps with Lowry, and I'd probably play, 20 snaps a game even. I might not be any more than that. So we're talking not very expensive guys. The list was so long. There's just so many guys. None of the names are jumping to my mind right now because I remember by the time I got done, there was like 20-some guys in the list, and it was hard to tell really what would separate them. I think they can find somebody, whether and even on this one, it's such a stopgap thing. They could get a guy who's 30 or 31 and just sign him for 1 year. This is one where you don't worry so much about the injury history and about his age, because you're just looking for 1 year of help from the guy. So there's, as we go on, maybe a name or two will come to me, but there are a lot of possibilities out there. And I like David. I think they're going to sign someone like that, but you don't know. Maybe they want to invest it all into a tight end and they won't have anything left over, but they really do. It sure seemed like they definitely could have used some run stopping help in the middle of their defensive line, because that run defense was an issue on and off for all of last year. And then we saw the whole thing just totally collapse in the NFC Championship game.
Thank you, David, for your question. Let's see if I can do this here. There we go. Jared wants to know if guard Lane Taylor is going to be released. If the Packers decide to release offensive guard Lane Taylor now, there could be cap savings about, I believe, $4.5 million that they would save against the cap in 2020. How valuable would that space be for the Packers in free agency now?
I think really valuable. And if they hadn't signed Wagner, then maybe you could see the argument for keeping Taylor, because maybe they'd want to move Jenkins to right tackle, and they wouldn't want to lose all their depth, so Taylor could be a starting guard, and Lucas Patrick could still be the backup interior guy. But after signing Wagner, that's their guy to start at right tackle if a rookie doesn't. So this is just a guess, no inside information. I'm thinking that they're trying to trade Taylor, and so they don't owe him any roster bonus, so they don't have to cut him until they need the cap room. And so maybe they're just waiting for hoping they can trade him. The problem they'll run into invariably is if they're looking to trade him, teams know they're going to cut the guy anyway. So why give up something when you can get him after he's cut? The only reason you do it is to be assured to get him because somebody else could also sign him. So maybe you could get a 7 for him, but I would still, if I were a betting man, I'd bet that they'll cut him sometime in the next week or two, or maybe the next couple days. But we don't know for sure what their plans are. But it just doesn't make a lot of sense that they'd want to keep him after doing the contract extension they did last year with Lucas Patrick, and then signing Wagner to play right tackle yesterday.
Certainly a possibility that Lane Taylor's future in Green Bay is no more. Nick now wants to know, should Packers wide receiver Geronimo Allison return? He will officially become a free agent on Wednesday. That's when the free agency window technically opens. All of this going on is the legal tampering period leading up to Wednesday. How likely is it that Geronimo Allison returns, given the fact that the top 3 receivers on the Packers this year included a running back in Aaron Jones?
If you're betting, I think you're betting against his return, but it's probably one of those things where they're going to let him go out and see what's out there. And if there's nothing out there that's very good, then maybe they try to bring him back on the cheap, but we're probably going to see some turnover at receiver. Now, if they don't sign anybody in free agency to play like a slot receiver, that might increase his odds of coming back. I just don't know what his market's going to be like. He and Valdez-Scantling were 2 guys who you thought were going to develop last year and become, because Allison played really well before he got hurt in 18 in those first few games. And neither one of those guys ended up doing much of anything last season overall. They had their moments here and there, don't get me wrong, but overall, neither one of them was a regular contributor, played really well, a guy they tried to get the ball to. So if I were betting, I would probably bet against his return, but maybe he won't have much of a market, and maybe he comes back on the cheap.
Ryan Gutekunst always preaches patience with receivers. We'll see how much patience he has left with Geronimo Allison in his development. Similarly, on a wide receivers note, Craig, our friend from Canada, wants to know, what about Ryan Grant, Packers wide receiver? Packers acquired him last year and didn't play him much at all, if at all, excuse me. Definitely, if the big if there, he did not play. He wasn't active at all last season for any single game during the regular season. How likely is it that Ryan Grant returns, given the fact that he wasn't used at all last season?
Yeah, I'm assuming 0 chance because they had him for most of the year, right? Didn't they have him? They picked him up fairly early, I think, and
They picked him up when Devontae Adams got injured, the turf toe injury.
Yeah, so they are right. Okay, so that's 5 games in or 6 games in, something like that. So if he didn't get on the field then, I just, with all the issues they had at receiver and playmaking, one of the mysteries is why they kept him on the roster all year without even giving him a shot. I just find it hard to believe that they're going to bring him back if he couldn't get on the field last season, because they're obviously going to draft there. They got St. Brown coming back. You got to assume they're going to use a top probably 2 pick, I would think, at receiver, maybe top 3, but I think more likely either first or second rounder. So I would think the chances of Grant returning are, I would think, pretty close to nil.
We'll see what ends up happening with Ryan Grant. Nolan asks, should the Packers draft a quarterback to study behind Rodgers? We, as in the media, we've asked Brian Gutekunst and Matt LaFleur how they would feel about drafting a quarterback in this year's draft, knowing that Aaron Rodgers has expressed that he's not ready to retire. He said he believes that he has a number of years ahead of him in the NFL. With that all in mind, how likely is it that the Packers would draft a quarterback this season?
It's something it's got to be on the radar, including in the first round. Now, to do it, they'd have to, if I'm them, you have to really, really like a guy to pick him with your first rounder when you're doing it this early and you need help to win while you still have Rodgers. But if there were a guy they had a really strong feeling about and he's available at 30 or even in the mid-20s and you can trade up and get him, it's something you'd have to think about. And I guess it's sure outside looking in, seems like the best candidate for that would be Jordan Love. But again, you'd have to really feel good about the guy to make a move like that. I mean, and anyone who thinks that that's crazy, just, you think back to when they drafted Rodgers, they got him in 2005. Let's just say that instead of picking him at number 24 at all overall because he fell to them. Let's just say they really, really liked him and he were available at 17 and they had to trade their first round pick next year to go up and get him, or even at 10 to go get him. Look how it turned out with Aaron Rodgers. That great a player, he was definitely worth a extra future one to get. Now, you'd have to have a super strong feeling about the guys, and it's pretty risky. I would bet against the Packers actually picking one in the first round this year. But if there's one they really like, I don't know how you don't do it, because you're talking about the future of the franchise.
If their guy is there, perhaps we'll see the Packers take a quarterback. Who knows? Lots of time until the draft rolls around. It's staying in April, the same time that it was set to, April 23rd through the 25th. However, no longer a fan event, unfortunately, for all of us. However, good that we are all being safe and healthy at home. And I'm glad that this worked out today, everyone. I'm glad that we were able to talk to some of you guys about free agency and everything else that's been going on. Thank you for participating. We will continue to have these live streams as free agency progresses, as news breaks. We will always be here for you. Truly, nothing can stop us. A pandemic cannot stop us from talking to our audience. We love that you're involved, and we love that you get to be a part of the conversation. So thank you for joining us. We are wishing you well. Stay healthy, stay safe, and we will see you next time. Have a good one.